Of a quorum, I call the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. This meeting is being conducted both in person and remotely via a Zoom webinar. Members Evelyn Abaya Isa, Diane Baum, Kira Cook, Yeben Wang, and Amy Krishnamurthy are participating via Zoom, and the remaining five school committee members are in person. Per our remote participation policy, BEDJA. Public participation is possible via the Zoom link or call-in phone number. Our school committee meetings are also live streamed on ActonTV's YouTube channel, although public participation is not possible with that option. The links and phone number are found on the posted agenda on the abschools.org calendar. This meeting is also being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. Per our remote policy, all votes will be done by roll call. I will call each member's name and they will state how they vote. Thank you for joining us. Just a note about how we will conduct discussions. I'll look around the room and note the members in the room that would wish to participate by asking questions or comments. And then Adam has kindly volunteered to help me manage the hands raised of our remote members, and we will participate that way. And then if there happen to be any community members that would like to participate, then they will be invited to after that. So, welcome back, everyone. This would ordinarily be like our first meeting of the school year. It doesn't really feel like the school year ended, as I think this might be the 5th meeting that I've chaired in this space, at least. So I just want to echo some of the sentiments that were expressed in the remarks at opening day. Those of you that were lucky enough to be able to watch as Peter and some of our other administrators spoke to the teachers on their first day of professional learning. I just want to stress patience. You know, over the last couple of weeks, I've been attending to questions and things on Facebook, and you know, people calling me and friends wanting to know things. And the truth is that this is hard, and this is something that no one else has ever done. No one that is on the school committee has ever done this. None of the administration has ever done this. None of our teachers have ever done this. And the truth is that the ways in which we like to communicate in the past, where we send everything out all at once and everyone gets the same information on the same day, just isn't able to happen now, because things are constantly changing. And so, you know, a good example is Chromebook pickup. So the high school was informed of when they might pick up, but elementary schools have not been informed yet. So it's coming. People be patient. And I just also want to note that this is not something that any of us signed up for. So it was noted by someone on Facebook when there was a complaint about something that I and others signed up for this by becoming school committee members. So that's not true. None of us signed up to do this, although we are all willing and able to do it. The conditions under which we're doing it are not really what we signed up for. Teachers signed up to teach, of course, but they didn't sign up to teach in the ways that they're being asked to teach now. And administrators certainly get paid to do full-time jobs, but none of them signed up to do this either. And not for the amount of time that it's taking, and not for the endless hours and weekends and time during vacation. So I just wanted to stress that everyone here is willing and excited to get the school year started, but it is not how any of us signed up for or expected. And so I hope that everyone is willing to grant a little bit of patience and appreciation for the work that is being done. So this is the part of our meeting where we have public participation. Please use the hand raise feature to participate in the meeting. Do not use the chat feature. According to our policy BEDH, members of the public may speak up for up to 3 minutes on items not included on the agenda. Comments regarding items that are on the agenda should be made during that part of the meeting. Typically, the committee and administration will not respond to comments during public participation. Is there anyone who would like to comment?
I'm not seeing it.
All right. So, item 3.1 is approval of the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee meeting minutes of 7/23 and 8/5. Oh, sorry, 8/5 is the next meeting. Is that what that means, Beth? Sorry, of 7/23. We have meetings of our meeting on July 23rd to approve. The minutes of August 5th will be done at the next meeting. I will take a motion if there is one.
I move to approve the minutes of July 23rd.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Anybody raising their hand online? Nope. All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Yeben?
Yes.
And me, yes. All right, those are approved unanimously. And now I will turn it over to Peter for the school opening update.
All right, well, good evening, everyone, and, thank you, Tessa. We're continuing to plan for, the new school year, and, just to echo Tessa's remarks, one of the comments I made to our faculty is that, time has seemingly become warped over the last 6 months, and what seems like can change on a daily basis actually, is measured in months and vice versa. And, the comment I made is, we're so warped in our view of time right now that we're talking about hybrid and remote learning like they're actually just old friends of ours and they've been around for years. And, the bottom line is this is actually, we're about to do something that has never been done in education before. And so, we know we have planned extensively for that return. We know our educators have worked tirelessly to prepare themselves for that transition. But when we welcome students back, it's going to be the first time that we've ever done something like this. And so, we understand, and I think the one thing that, the word that comes to mind, I think that Tessa was talking to, was we want to all act with grace through this period, because regardless of what it looks like, the one thing we can continue to do is think about how we interact with each other. And that's just so important because everyone is working hard. Our teachers are working hard. Our staff is working hard to prepare buildings for them. Our leaders are working hard to make sure that everything is ready to go and coordinated. Our families are working incredibly hard right now. But what strikes me is we all tend to work in the bubble that we know, and we sometimes don't appreciate fully everyone else's bubble because we don't see it and we don't live it on a daily basis. And so I think this idea of being graceful and acting with grace is just so important as we approach this because, we all have a heightened level of anxiety right now about what the beginning of school looks like. And it ranges from anxious to fearful to some people just outright terrified. And we need to understand as we interact with each other that people come at it with different emotions. And our goal that we've talked about as schools is to meet people where they're at. And so I think that's just a good community message to be sending. I do have a few updates for you, and I'm going to share my screen. And I apologize because I have to work off of a district computer and not my own, so it's sometimes not quite as smooth as I want. And we will be sharing this update with families tomorrow, but I just wanted to let you know of a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about some return to school and work flow charts that our nurses have helped create based on DESE and DPH guidance, some metrics for monitoring public health data to ensure that we're really thinking deeply about what community spread of the virus looks like in terms of our readiness to have schools open. We're going to talk about just briefly the in-person and remote program enrollment update, some timelines for releasing student schedules and class lists, athletics, some initial information, and then welcoming educators back and what we've been doing. So the first thing I want to share, and I just have to thank our nurses. Our nurses have been incredible throughout the summer. Our school nurses are on typical school year contracts like all educators, but all of our nurses have been meeting weekly throughout the entire summer just to make sure that they're prepared to support everyone else who comes back in the fall. So I'm very grateful to Dawn. I'm very grateful to our nurse leaders, and I'm very grateful to our nurses for doing that. But they essentially went through all of the DESE guidance and boiled it down into some flow charts for how we need to respond to various incidents of COVID in our schools. So this is all linked in our Transition to School website now, but what you can really see, and actually I think I have them up already, this is the general flow chart, just talking about what happens when there's a close contact with a confirmed case, what happens if you have cold-like or flu-like symptoms, but you go to the doctor and you're actually diagnosed as having the flu and it's not COVID. What do you need to do? Symptoms and a positive test result, symptoms and a negative test result, and then symptoms but not tested for COVID, so someone never got a test. What are the procedures? So that's all on our website now, and people can access that. And then there are also detailed flowcharts for both students and staff for various cases. So if I'm symptomatic, but I've never had contact with a confirmed case, I'm symptomatic and I've had close contact, or I've had close contact, but I don't have symptoms. So these are on our website. These are essentially the procedures that we'll be following as a school district as we come into next year. And we just want to make sure that it's in an easily digestible format for our community. The other piece that I want to show you is we have been working hard behind the scenes to develop some community health metrics to support our in-person instruction. And this is something that we have done with very close collaboration with our local health departments. And it was also based on some of the state guidance that came out. So we've been working on this for several weeks behind the scenes, but we needed to model it and pilot it and then work back and forth with our health departments to make sure that it was showing the right way and we had the right metrics. So we're now ready to release this. Our health department here knows that it's going out, and this is now posted on our website, but we ran sample reports for August 20th and August 27th. The process for this essentially is that the state releases its statewide report on every Wednesday by 4:00 p.m. We will then take that information, process it for Acton and Boxborough specifically, and also for Middlesex County, pull those numbers out, and then republish them as our district-specific metrics. And we will publish this report every week on Thursday so that the community knows what we're looking at. To give you a sample, this was the most recent report. So this was our report from today, and this is based on information released by the state yesterday. I will say last week there was a little kerfuffle because the state published data, and then within 24 hours they changed their data because they saw some errors. So it is prone to errors every once in a while. This is new for everyone, including the state, and so we have to understand some things may shift a little. But essentially we're going to look at two primary metrics. We are looking at something called the average daily incidence rate per 100,000 residents. And this is an important indicator, and it's the most basic indicator the state points to in terms of a community's readiness to open. This took me a little bit of time to really dig into and make sure I understood correctly. But when we talk about average daily incidents, basically what they're doing is they're looking at all of the incidents in a community and over a 2-week period, so it's a 14-day period, and then they're doing an average daily rate, but then it's based on 100,000 residents. So just to put that in perspective, there's a maximum threshold the state has looked at around 8 cases, average daily cases per 100,000 residents. That would mean that over a 2-week period in Acton, we'd have somewhere between 22 and 23 cases in that 2-week period. Just to give a little bit of perspective, we are nowhere near that right now. We have seen a little bit of an uptick in Acton in the last week or so. Right now, the average daily cases in Acton are at 3.3. And in Boxborough, they've had multiple weeks now of 0 cases. So that's clearly a very strong indicator for Boxborough. The other indicator that we looked at was out of Johns Hopkins University, and it's the percent positivity. And essentially, by looking at percent positivity, you can get a general sense of how many cases in a community aren't being caught through testing. So obviously, if you have low positivity, like 1% or under, there are generally also very few cases in your community that are floating out there that haven't been caught. But if you have a higher percent positivity, then you have to start to become concerned that there are now many more cases within the community that aren't being picked up through testing. So Johns Hopkins and I believe it's the WHO have both agreed on a kind of a percent positivity rate of about 5% for regions that should be considering opening things such as schools. So we are looking for a percent positivity rate below 5%. Right now in Acton, we're just barely over 1%, and in Boxborough it's 0% because there are no cases. We have had some questions like, what happens if, is it automatic that if we go into the red? So this actual data right here, where maximum threshold of less than 8 cases per day, what happens if we go into the red for a day and we exceed that threshold? Does that mean we're automatically closed? The answer is nothing can be automatic in this era. And when I was talking to a community member about this, I gave an example that we may go and have an average daily rate of, greater than 8. But when we talk to the Board of Health, we may learn that that's centered in a nursing home in the town. And that, the vast majority of cases in the community are in that cluster. That cluster actually has no bearing on the safety of the schools, and so we would look at that differently. So, there's no guarantee that that's the case, and there's no 100% answer, but these are two good leading indicators that are widely agreed upon by most epidemiologists as ready to open school. We will also look at Middlesex County in the larger perspective as we start to look at this, as we start to look at these metrics. And we're looking for the same thresholds, but, Middlesex County right now is 3 in terms of average daily cases per 100,000 residents, and percent positivity is under 1% in Middlesex County. So regionally, the metrics are about as good as they get. I did have a question today that came in from a parent saying, I've seen other school districts who are saying they're starting remote or even starting remote and then phasing in-person learning in general, and why aren't we thinking about that? My response was, everything I've heard in the public health sector has actually predicted that the metrics will probably become less favorable as time goes on, particularly as we approach winter, and that the rates are so low right now in our communities and in the region that they probably won't get much better. It's going to be really hard to beat what we're seeing right now in the foreseeable future. And so if we aren't opening our schools now, what would you point to that would say it now all of a sudden becomes safe to open? So I think that's something that we've looked at and thought deeply about. But we do have favorable numbers now. We're in a good place. But these will be published on our website each Thursday, so people know where to find them. And they are there. The last 2 weeks of data is there now, and then we'll just continue to update it. The next piece, this will be a quick update. Enrollment updates. I just wanted to give you some of the most recent numbers. So since we originally asked families to pick one of the 2 programs, we've had a number of families who have come to us and said, look, there's some changed circumstance within my household, and I'd like to try and change. So far, we've been able to accommodate that, and we've been able to make changes between in-person or remote programs for pretty much every family that's come to us. Over the last couple days, though, we actually had to pause that because our schools are now finalizing all of their schedules and class lists. So we've put a pause on changing programs for right now. Once we release schedules, we'll be able to start making some adjustments again to people's program selection. But once that happens, it has to be within reasonable class sizes. We can't put 40 students in a remote learning class. We can't put 35 students in a remote learning class because the class is no longer effective for them. Similarly, we can't put, 15 students in one of our cohorts of hybrid learning because it's just not safe. So we are going to be constrained when we open up. We're keeping kind of a wait list right now so we can keep track of who's requesting changes. And we will do the best we can to meet as many of our families' needs as possible. That's always been our goal right along. In terms of overall enrollment, it has shifted a little bit. I thought this would just be interesting to see and keep watch over. But we have 1,741 students planning to come back in person, which is about 69% of our population. And we are now at 783 students planning to be remote next year, which is 31% of that population. So what's that? In elementary school only. At the junior high school level, 641 students, or 77% of the population, is coming back in person, and 23%, or 191 students, will be remote. And then at the high school, just over 1,500 students in person and 260 students remote, which is about an 85-15 split on those. So you have a sense, Tessa, I know you talked earlier about, some frustrations that, maybe the high school released its Chromebook information before the, elementary schools did. The good news is we'll be able to equally disappoint in the opposite direction with student schedules because we have a staggered schedule rollout. Tomorrow, the high school will actually be sharing student schedules for students who selected the remote-only option. The high school felt it very, very important to preview student schedules with remote students because there are some courses that they just can't run in the remote environment, and they wanted to make sure that families knew about that and students knew about it, so that if they wanted to make a change to in-person, they had an opportunity to do that before schedules for in-person learning were finalized. So remote-only high school students will see schedules tomorrow. September 1st, the junior high school team placements will be available in the Power School portal. On September 2nd, elementary class placements will be available in Power School. And then September 3rd, next Friday, high school schedules for students in the hybrid in-person program will also be available in the portal. And just as a reminder to everyone, our first day of school is the 14th of September. We do just continue to remind everyone that the fastest way to have questions answered is by using that communication map that we have published on the transition website and our district website. Athletics. So as you likely have heard through different media, the state published some athletic guidelines over the course of 2 days, August 17th and 18th. On August 17th, the governor's office released the State Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs guidance around athletics, and that was the guidance that classified athletics into either low, moderate, or high-risk activities, and that's really based on the level of contact in each athletic program. So football, wrestling, ice hockey, those would all be, and cheerleading are all considered high-risk athletics. That was followed 1 day later by DESE and the Department of Public Health, which had a little bit more guidance. And the second set of guidance focused on, public health metrics for districts being able to participate in sports. So for example, if a district was a red district or had that really high incidence rate of cases within the community, they are ineligible to have their kids play sports for the fall. So that's a really important factor. But anyone who is in the yellow, green, or white categories are allowed to participate. The other piece that came out in that guidance that I highlighted in the memo was that if a district were to start fully remote, it would take a separate vote of the school committee to allow the high school to participate in athletics. That really does not apply to us because we are planning an in-person return, so there is no school committee vote required. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that, and I reread the guidance about 7 times to make sure I didn't miss something. There's still more to be determined on athletics, though, because the State Athletic Association really left a lot of how to work through this to the individual leagues that happen. So we're a member of the Dual County League. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with all of the superintendents, principals, and athletic directors from everywhere in the Dual County League. And we really need to meet and look at the proposal from athletic directors of how they want to manage what a season might look like, what the sports might look like, and in all honesty, we're also waiting for the State Athletic Association to release the rules of play, because a lot of the rules of play for some of these moderate sports have to be modified significantly. So for example, soccer, and I know this because my son's a soccer player, they will not allow things like corner kicks because it during a corner kick in soccer, all the players are bunched up in the box, grabbing, pushing, things like that. They are not allowing headers. You can't kick the ball into the box. So there's just a lot of modifications that are going to happen for some of these sports. So we haven't seen those yet. So we really need to take a look on a sport-by-sport basis with our principals and athletic directors to make sure that we're also comfortable with how things will be modified to make sure it is the safest possible environment for our students. So we'll meet tomorrow. We will push out more information to our families next week, and I'll have more of an update about exactly what we're doing with athletics, probably for next Thursday's meeting. And then finally, we mentioned this before, but we did welcome our educators back. I think a lot of our educators felt very differently and had a lot of conflicting feelings about what the return to school looks like. One of the things, and I know all of our leadership talked about this, but the thing we probably look forward to most every year is actually seeing people. It's an opportunity to shake hands with people give each other hugs, things like that. And, if you tried to do that now, A, you're not allowed to do it, and B, you'd hit your head on the computer screen. So we just can't have that many people in a room together. And so it's just a very, very different feel. And I think that struck everybody differently. We also know that as people come back, some people are just ready to take on that challenge and feel comfortable in the environment and everything else, and then other people are really scared about what it looks like and unsure of themselves. So it's going to take some time and adjustment for everyone to get, kind of those sea legs back and feel comfortable back in the environment. Just to give you a little bit of a preview, we're going to come back next week and actually do a presentation for the committee on the teaching and learning side of what we've been focused on this summer. I know so much has been operational. We really haven't had an opportunity to talk about teaching and learning, the improvements to remote learning that we're looking at, the focus on social emotional learning. But we will be doing that next week. So just kind of stay tuned for a little more, and it will whet the appetite of the community for one more week. But the theme for our professional learning over the course of the week was creating caring, connected classroom communities. So, the focus of our educators' time, large chunks of time, are actually just spent making sure that teachers and staff feel comfortable and are prepared for the critical health and safety practices that we need to implement. But then in addition, a lot of our focus from a professional learning standpoint has been around student and educator social emotional needs, anti-bias, anti-racism education, and improving remote learning practices. So those are the real three big picture things that we're looking at over these few weeks leading up to school. So with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I will stop sharing my screen, and we're all here to see what we can do to make sure everyone's comfortable with where we're at.
Does anyone have a comment or a question for Peter? No? No? Okay, great. Thank you. And now you can talk about the handbook. Unless there's something.
So the handbook, for those of you who are new, typically we approve the handbook, around this time of year as we're heading into the school year. The handbook is something that's developed by high school, but voted on by the school committee. This year, the high school made minimal changes to the handbook, and I'm also trying to manage participants at the same time, because I believe Maureen O'Grady is here from the high school in the audience. And so, Maureen, I'm going to go ahead and promote you to panelist and see if you have anything that you'd like to highlight for the high school handbook. Oops, something's. Hi, Maureen.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so the high school handbook, we just made 3 changes. We didn't think this was the year to make a lot of programmatic changes or policy changes in the handbook with so much going on as it is. So our handbook changes, the suggested changes, if you do have the document in front of you, it's the first one regarding late transportation. Basically, I just reworded that statement, that section. Initially, it said if you are detained after school and have difficulty getting home, you should contact the principal, associate principal, or a school secretary for assistance. I replaced that with 2 late buses are available for students who may have been detained after school. The buses will depart campus from the front circle at 4:45. And the reason being that not everybody is available or accessible after school. If a student's in the front lobby looking for a way home or is without a ride and needs some assistance, and the administrators, one might be up at Leary Field, or it would just be too complicated. So at least the information is there where students can get the late bus to get home. The next recommendation is to our physical education makeup procedures. Things changed last year with our PE department. They used to allow students to make up missed PE classes during the school day. Students would arrange with any of the PE teachers to make up a PE class if they had missed one, to make up a class during a free period or during lunch. They made the change for a couple of reasons. One, it really didn't support our wellness policy in terms of encouraging students to take their lunch periods to socialize with friends. That's going to look different this year. Or to study or relax or what have you. And so encouraging students to fill that time with another class didn't feel right. So we did make that change. Additionally, other classes, other content areas in the building, if a student misses a class period because they're out sick or they're late to school for whatever reason, the expectation has never been that they find a time within the next couple of days to make up that full period. It's actually, we work with the student, teachers work with students to make up anything that they may have missed. If they've missed a quiz, they can work with the teacher to make up that quiz. But the expectation has never been that they need to make up the entire period if they missed a class for being out sick. So we just wanted the PE policy to reflect that. And David James did a really nice job of kind of shifting that a bit. And then lastly is the acceptable use policy. And this was written by Amy Bisowitz and her committee regarding the one-to-one initiative. This was a piece of it. So they rewrote the acceptable use policy now that all students will be receiving Chromebooks and that they'll be filling out the acceptable use policy. I believe that will be done electronically, but we made the adjustments so that they would show in the current handbook. And that's really all we have. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
If I can just make one comment on that. Two things for you. One is just with regard to the acceptable use policy. You may think, wait, there's a change to a policy. Isn't that a school committee level piece that you need to take on? The actual school committee level policy simply references that all parents will be required to sign off on this acceptable use policy as it is in the high school and junior high school handbook. So it really references just right back to the school handbook. So when they say they're changing that policy, that really is a school level policy to change. The other element, you will also notice that there's Title IX language in later on for a first read tonight. That is not in the high school handbook right now because you have not voted the new Title IX policy, and so they can't really change their handbook before you vote the policy. So once you vote that new policy, that would just automatically go into the high school handbook, and that's just more of an administrative process that we have to take on. So just two quick notes for you.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Before I take questions, I just want to note for those in the audience that we are not using the Q&A feature. So if you have a question, please use the raise hand feature and we will get to you. So do any committee members have a question or comment? I know John does. Does anyone else have a question before that? No? All right, John, it's all you.
Thank you very much. The discussion that we had last year when we looked at the handbook said that what we are looking at tonight is what we've done for the last 20 years. We've simply taken the handbook as it is, we have made some minor changes, and we have moved on. I have to say that I don't think that the handbook really strikes the tone that we would like to strike as a district. And when I read through the technology section, I was tempted to say, why don't we just subtitle the handbook Crime and Punishment? Because that's the way a lot of it reads. And I don't think that's really the message that we want to send through the handbook. I certainly understand why this did not rise to the top of the priority list this year. But I just can't look at this and think that we can't do better in the future. So this is simply an appeal that, when we look at what we have to do next year or perhaps the year after, that coming back fundamentally to the handbook is something worth consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? If there are no other questions, then the proposed motion is found in the packet.
I move to approve the changes proposed for the FY21 ABRHS student handbook.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we will do a roll call vote. Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Ginny? Yes. Kira?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes, but I did want to note, I don't know, I didn't figure out how to raise my hand. I think the beginning of the handbook said 2019 to 2020. So we need to revise that. But
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely, and we'll make that adjustment once, once the handbook, we can officially move it to 2020, 2021 with the updates from last year. Thank you.
Thanks, Evelyn. Diane?
Yes, I'm also, for some reason, even though I use Zoom a lot, I'm struggling to find the raise hand feature. And I just wanted to ask a quick question of Peter. There was some back and forth with a community member on email about disclosing to those who are going to be using their computers that there might be some capability of activating the camera or audio remotely. So can you just speak to whether or not we're protected in that way?
Sure, yeah, no, our staff don't use any technology to be able to turn on any cameras or anything like that remotely. There was a case, and I remember this case because I was a high school administrator at the time, and we kind of joked in all honesty about the stupidity of the administrators for doing it. But there was a case out of Pennsylvania where I think a principal was concerned about like what students were using their Chromebooks for, and so they decided to turn on the cameras to find out. Wildly inappropriate, it doesn't happen. And, you know, that would be a huge violation for us if people were to do that, but our technology staff does not do that. Our administrative staff has no access to anything to be able to do it. So, you know, I think we reassured the person that was not going to happen. You know, the other question that had arisen at that point was around concerns about requiring students to turn on cameras. I think, you know, the intent behind why we wanted to require it, we heard a lot of feedback from teachers that it was really hard to know if you were reaching students in the remote environment if you can't see them. Because we had a good number of students last spring who would, you know, log into a class, but all you saw was an initial on the screen or something, and you really don't know what's going on beyond that. And it's so different from a regular class environment. After looking into some of the legal challenges of that, though, we really can't require a student to have their camera on. So we're going to continue to strongly encourage it, talk to families about the educational value and our students about the educational value of why, but we also know that we're going to need to look beyond that to think of other ways that we can engage and make sure kids are with us during that process.
Thank you. So my vote is yes.
Yeben?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And me, yes. And to those of you that are those of you that are participating via Zoom, just if you raise your hand on the screen, I can see you. So Adam's managing looking at the hand raise feature on the participant list, but if you just raise your hand, I can see you. So up next is Dave's budget update.
Thank you.
I'm working on it, Dave.
Okay.
I have my own information going on my computer. I'm taking notes on my iPad, and I'm managing the meeting on Zoom, so I'm a little frazzled on this one. Let's see.
Well, I miss when you introduced me as about to give a riveting discussion about OPEB and things like that, but.
I'm sorry, tonight we have Dave, who's going to give us a riveting update on our budget situation.
I meant him.
Dave wanted me to qualify that. He said tonight's would not be riveting, but just simply exciting.
Okay. Why did I do that? Okay. You have a memo that I sent which was intended to be detailed. It's the preliminary closing memo for FY20 Finances. It's preliminary because the audit is underway. The E&D certification process hasn't yet begun, but we're working on schedules. So technically, it's not the final version, but it's probably going to be the final version. We have a history of minimal and zero material audit adjustments, and so I think it's pretty safe to say that these are where we're going to end up for FY20. Thank you. This is a chart showing 4 years' worth of budget variances. So did we have more revenue than we budgeted? Did we have fewer expenditures than we budgeted? The revenue variances in yellow, the expenditure variances in green, and the grand total in blue. And big picture, it's a fairly consistent trend for these 4 years. In total, we're consistently generating over $1 million a year in combined turnback. I will say from the outset, it's hard to foresee that in FY21 happening, given what we know to this point and what we can possibly foresee happening this upcoming year. So at least for FY20, another year looks fairly similar to the last several. I'm going to talk very briefly about revenues, more details in the memo. If we can advance a slide, please. It's just a quick pie chart to show the source of the variances. This is not the total revenues for each of these components, but the amount by which they varied from budget. The biggest hit was transportation aid, which, as I said in the memo, came in June at almost 84%. That was not expected, but was most welcome, and provided several $100,000 of positive variance that had not been previously expected. I think otherwise, and I had no, it's on the next page. Sorry. I'm a little confused because I made an edit, but not on these slides, and it's in the next slide. There's less conservative budgeting going on, and so the revenue variances. If you can go back one slide and look at the yellow bars, the yellow bar for FY20, absent that sizable chunk received at year end, and absent the bond proceeds which were invested, the revenue variance was going to be very, very small. And I had projected for you in Q3 about $100,000 maximum. So the combination of economics getting tighter at the state level and aid not being as generous, and especially transportation aid, and the other components of revenue being budgeted a lot more tightly, I don't foresee generating significant revenue variances going forward, certainly not this coming year. And in the next slide, after the pie chart, there are an explanation, just bullet points for the major components of the revenue variances. They're discussed in more detail in the memo. As I said, the biggest surprise was transportation aid. And as you can see, even with the big uptick at year end, it's about 2/3 of what the variance was in 2019. A couple of slides on expenditures for the budget. The bars indicate where we thought we were going to be at the end of the year, at the second quarter mark, the third quarter mark, and now. And so going back a half a year's time, we projected about a $600,000 deficit in expenditures, if you can remember that. COVID hit, and by the time we reported the third quarter, we had captured a number of the savings related to the shutdown and projected about a $300,000 variance. Again, I'm going to admit to being somewhat conservative when at any point in an interim basis for financial projecting. And as the shutdown continued, we ended up with about a $350,000 turnback on the expenditure side. The end actually puts us more in line on a historical basis with where we typically end relative to budget. But from 600 minus to 600 positive without the shutdown and its effects on some of the things on the next slide happening, we would have been hard pressed we certainly wouldn't have been that much in the black as far as expenditures. Those are the major components of variances in general. Special ed costs were higher. We had higher than expected tuition costs. Utilities, instructional budget, and especially personnel all were to the good as a result of the shutdown for I believe, obvious reasons. So once we are done looking at revenues and expenses and we see that the net is a little over $1 million, that leads into E&D, and what I've done is given you a 6-year track record of E&D reserve at the end of the year. In gross dollars, you can see in gross dollars, it was a very steep incline from full regionalization till about FY17. It's pretty much leveled off since then. I will say, though, parenthetically, that in FY19, that's net of $1 million transfer to the newly formed Capital Stabilization Fund. So the percentages, as you can see at the bottom, the school committee last year adopted a policy of having a target for E&D of between 4 and 4.5%. 3.7 doesn't hit that target, admittedly. I will say that, and I think I say this in the memo, were it not for the impact of next year's debt service, both the CIP program and the new school, which collectively add over $4 million to the budget, there would have been a 0.2% change in this number, the percentage of E&D in relation to budget. So without the new debt, it would have been 3.9. That's not to try any sleight of hand, but the fact is that the denominator of that calculation changed significantly with no impact, no resulting impact on the E&D amount. E&D is one component of total reserves. I've shown you this slide before. The trend continues to go upward in terms of real dollars. And so it's in total over $7 million combined for these three major reserve sources: capital stabilization in orange, circuit breaker in yellow, E&D in blue. And I think, as a noteworthy observation, the total as a percentage of the next year budget has remained flat at 7.7%. Again, notwithstanding, as I just said a minute ago, the fact that the denominator went up significantly. So you can see that even though the total reserves went up several $100,000 as a percentage, it remained the same at 7.7%. Remember that this phenomenon, this healthy reserve position, was one of the things that was recognized as contributing to our AAA bond rating when the bonds were issued in March. A little bit more focus on one of the other reserve components, being circuit breaker. You can see that the blue bar indicates that we have kept more at the end of the year. So the total of the blue and the yellow is how much reimbursement we've received during that year, and the blue is how much we have not spent. In other words, how much we've carried forward. We have effectively, I couldn't erase what appears like $1 worth of additional money on the top of the fourth bar, but we did not spend any of our reimbursement in FY20. We'll carry that forward completely into FY21, and we must spend it all in FY21. This is, I believe, an important best practice to strive for, to keep all of 1 year's circuit breaker in hand and spend it in the following year. It's obviously the most prudent from a fiscal reserve standpoint. It also offers budget certainty. I absolutely know how much we're going to spend in FY21 and can project that going forward in setting the FY22 budget. But one other thing, in finalizing the FY21 budget, it's important to remember that we increased the projected use of FY21 circuit breaker to by a very large amount, to 3.6 million. So even though we've got 2.8 on reserve, what we're planning to spend in FY21 exceeds that by $800,000. That's frankly a bigger spread. It's a somewhat bigger spread than we're accustomed to over the last several years of budgeting. So transitioning to the other funds, just briefly, I've given you some detail and some summaries of the transaction history for FY20. This is how we end up at year end. And it was important, I think, for me to show that, again, based on a presentation we made about mid-year when there were some dire predictions for some of these revolving accounts, it turned out that all of them ended the year with a positive fund balance, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One is the obvious, that these programs did not run into a deficit, but the second is, had any of them run into deficit, that's a direct reduction to E&D. Kind of, you can say, well, it's kind of a non sequitur, but it's a mandated break in the way the E&D is set, and so would have reduced our E&D. You can see that if I put up this same pie chart a year earlier, the grand total would have been 3.9 million, and so in the aggregate, there was a decrease of $1.2 million, and about a third between school lunch and all of the community ed programs and the pre-K and the all-day K program, in round numbers. Those are the ones that took the biggest hit from the inability to collect fee revenue during the shutdown. And so that brings us to what to expect for FY21. The good news about Chapter 70 is the state came out and said that they came out with a number for FY21 Chapter 70 aid, which is going to fund us at the FY20 level. The good news is it's not a 1% cut, it's not a 10% cut, it's not a cut. The bad news is we lose our $30 per pupil minimum aid, at least at this point. There could be opportunities for the state to receive more federal assistance, at which point it might fund things like minimum aid for us districts that are over foundation, and SOA relief for the less economically well-off districts. They don't have any of that yet. For other revenues, I don't have any basis yet to determine any variances. My statement from a few minutes ago stands that it's going to be hard to imagine any kind of significant revenue turn back for FY21. For costs, we've worked all summer and we're still trying to quantify how significant the costs are for opening in this dual environment in a couple weeks. We've hired remote staff. There's an incremental amount of staff that have been hired. We've purchased technology for students and staff, and we've acquired PPE for health and safety reasons. On the flip side, there's been significant federal funding allocated to date. The ESSER fund, which we've applied for and will defray some of the costs of the technology. FEMA, Peter just signed today an application to get our first slug of FEMA money. It's not a bank breaker, but the good news is it's costs that were captured in FY20, and so this will be an FY21 revenue source. It's a little over $50,000, but it's to the good. The CARES Act, which allocated funds to Acton and Boxborough that we've discussed, and the COVID Relief Fund, which is available to the district. We're going to be presenting at next week's meeting, I believe, a more, I won't say final version, but we'll get into the details and numbers behind these words that are on the slide at next week's meeting. And one epilogue here is that Massachusetts still has undistributed funds from its first distribution of COVID funds, and so that they have. If there's no more federal funding available, that might come to us in some form in FY22. So we were optimistic in July that the Senate was nearing the Senate in Washington was nearing some completion on another round of funding. As you know, that seems to have stalled, but we'll keep an eye on it. And lastly, right around the corner is the FY22 budget. There was an agenda item on this week's budget subcommittee meeting to discuss the FY22 budget calendar, and it's only August, but it happens fast. And knowing what we know now, the only thing we can guarantee is that process is going to be different. And so with homage to John, because I haven't put a meme up in here for a while, this is what the new journey may look like. Is Peter Boyd, okay. And it's, do we take the yellow brick road, or do we take the red brick road, or is there something else? So it's going to be challenging, to say the least, and interesting professionally, but there's going to need to be a lot of work and communication to you as to where things appear to be headed. So thank you for that. That's my report.
Thanks, Dave. It was exciting as always. Riveting. We're lucky to have you, Dave. Not all financial reports are quite as interesting as yours. Does anyone have a question or comment for Dave about any of that? Diane?
Yeah, just a comment and I guess a question. First of all, it was stunning and shocking to see those revolving fund balances fall the way they did, and I think it's really good. It's great news that they're still in the positive. I just want to give a shout out to Kirsten Nelson for all of the work she did over the summer to kind of hold on to that revolving fund balance. I know a lot of people bought food that she was able to make available to the community, and just wanted to acknowledge her. Dave, at one point you were estimating COVID-related costs for FY21 in the $2.2 million range. You know, not to preempt next week, but are you still confident that that's the number or not?
Yeah, I don't want to preempt next week because, to be honest, Diane, the numbers change rapidly. And there's going to be some illustration of the additional costs, but also the reduced costs from providing educational services in the manner that they're prescribed for next year. There are some built-in savings that we're going to recognize. And so the net, we'll explain the net additional cost of operating in two forms. There's an additional burden to the district from the decision to cancel all-day kindergarten. That tuition source is gone, and those costs, whatever costs are remaining, will need to be borne by the operating budget. And the only other thing, and this goes back to your first observation about food service, at this point, we're not allowed to use the COVID relief money for revenue replacement. Now, I'm not saying that we would necessarily. We're still looking at the need to balance everything in the operational budget, in the operating budget next year. But if there was ever an opportunity to restore the food service balance or the community ed balance legally with federal funds, we would recommend that. And I know colleagues whose programs were not as robust going into the shutdown and were underwater financially at the end of the year and had to be made up by the general fund. We're fortunate not to be in that situation.
John?
Thanks, Dave. With respect to the point that you raised that the E&D was going to be below the policy limit of 4%, we had some discussion of this in Budget Subcommittee, and I was comfortable that 3.7 isn't that far from 4, and that because part of the driver for that was the change in the denominator related to the debt service, that wasn't really worth agonizing over. However, you've also just stated that you expect to have no turn back this year. And if that turns out to be true, then we will really be, outside the window prescribed by the policy, which means that one of two things has to happen. Either one, we need to wind up with a better financial picture than we think we're going to, or two, we need to revisit the policy.
Yeah, and just to be clear, John, that when I said no turnbacks, I was specifically talking about revenues. Expenditures there's absolutely no basis to say where we'll end up. And the fact of the matter is, if we happen to, because of exigent circumstances about COVID, go to a fully remote environment at any point that's material for the remainder of the school year, we've got experience on that. We saved significant amount of money financially. It wasn't to a good educational end, but certainly when you don't go to the school and turn on the lights and turn on the heat and bus kids in there, you save money. And so if I've been telling colleagues here, one of two things is going to happen, or variations of them. Either we're going to go at some point pivot to all remote because of COVID. It won't be a good thing educationally, but financially it should be positive if past experience applies. Or we don't, and we stay in school, and educationally that would be a joy to have to do the accounting for, in my opinion.
Great. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So that was a thorough presentation, Dave. Thank you so much. All right. Up next is the approval of the change of members of the Other Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund, or OPEB. It says you on there, but I have language to say it. So, all right. So this item is an annual vote to update members of the OPEB Advisory Board per our trust agreement. The trust specifies that the members of the Director of Finance, School Committee Chair, and a representative from the Acton Finance Committee and the Boxborough Finance Committee. We appreciate that Steve Noon and Gary Kushner will continue as the FinCom representatives. Please see the motion on the cover sheet if you would like to make it.
I would gladly move that the ABRSC approve the following members of the OPEB Trust Fund Board of Advisors for FY21. Dave Verdolino, Steve Noon, Gary Kushner, and Tessa McKinley.
Second.
Is there any discussion or questions? All right, then we will do a roll call vote. Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Yevon?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And me. Yes, that passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item is 3.3. We have subcommittee and member reports. 3.3.1 is approval of FY21 EDCO board member, advisory member, and school committee leadership liaison roundtable representatives. EDCO requires that member school committees vote their EDCO representatives. There is another motion on the cover sheet. Adam?
I move that the ABRSC approve the following: EDCO board member voting, Peter Light; EDCO advisory member non-voting, Tessa McKinley; and EDCO school committee leadership liaison / roundtable members, Nora Shine and Angie So.
Second.
Is there any questions or discussion? Great. We will do a roll call vote. Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Yevon?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And me, yes. All right. You may, Peter.
All right, just with regard to EDCO, just so you all know, I am also going to be on the Executive Finance Committee for EDCO as well. That doesn't require any school committee action, but that's something that I felt was important, given some of the financial challenges of EDCO.
Thanks, Peter. All right, so our subcommittee member reports. Diane, you are up next with a policy update.
Okay, thank you. Policy Sub had our first meeting on August 20th, and we're bringing to you tonight a first read on 2 policies. Both reflect the work of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Assistant Superintendent, Dawn Bentley. The first is Policy ACAB in your packet, Prohibition of Harassment. This is a required revision to our existing policy in order to align it with the new Title IX federal regulations, which took effect in early August. The new rule directs how schools respond to sexual harassment and sexual violence. Every school district must now have policies and procedures in place, as well as staff training to ensure compliance with the new federal regulations. Tessa, should I just present both of these policies all at once, or do you want to stop after each one?
Why don't we stop and we can discuss each one in case
I
there's
don't know if
questions.
Dawn is here and wants to add anything. Please do so.
She is here. She shook her head. She has nothing to add at the moment. You're good. All right. Adam?
Yeah, I have a comment / question. As I've learned from some of my colleagues, a clarifying question, which is with regards to the prohibition of harassment policy. As I began to read it and got tired reading very long policy, I was curious if there are any parts of this that we can move into a procedure. I think, typically when we reviewed policies, we tried really hard to make them easily digestible so that the intent of the policy was covered in the policy, and the, for lack of a better phrase, meat and potatoes of how it actually gets enacted is put into the procedure. So I'm curious if that's a possibility or if this is legislatively required to be in the policy.
So in conversation, I've asked our attorney that very same question earlier today, which I'd asked already and gotten clarification on. I'm like, are you sure about that? Because I really want to, anyway. He said that yes, he can certainly go back and separate the pieces out, but it will not flow the way that it does currently. And because this has to live in the junior high and the high school handbook, it all has to go in together, and so it makes some sense to keep it together. That was the attorney's recommendation, but certainly if you want us to go back and do that, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, I think the only concern I have is that at its current length, it becomes untenable. Like, I don't really know what we're trying to do. That's my only concern. And I know maybe there's some phrasing that can be done up front that says, here's the intent, here's what we're doing, and following this is all of the details. So for those of us who can't bear reading through all of that at once, there's some sort of summary at the front end.
John?
I wanted to sort of second Adam's sentiment that these policies, which are not readable by anybody but a select audience, serve only that select audience. And so as a checkbox kind of item, they're great. As are we really helping people do a good job? They're not great. But I will know that I did take a look at this, and I didn't see any prohibition against school committee members harassing the chair, and I was pleased that the policy didn't prohibit that.
That's great, John. Thanks.
Kira has a comment.
And you get to go after that, Kira. Aren't you lucky?
Lordy. I wanted to know if how much of this is boilerplate? Because I have a question about there was a line that says that that we can have, or a person, a complainant can have a advisor during the grievance process, and they are not required to be an attorney. And I have questions as to whether or not we can add language to that, maybe advocating that person be an attorney, because I see a potential power struggle there. But I guess I don't have a sense of whether or not this lawyerly language must be the way it is because of state law.
So that's a complex answer because actually the way that, so this was a law that was written for colleges and for colleges to implement, and colleges have many more levels of folks and people and processes that look more like this than K-12 does. So we've been told that this will be very difficult to implement in light of all of our other requirements under mandated reporting, FERPA, some of the other pieces of work that we're required to do, and that it will be really interesting when and if we get our first complaint, because we'll have to work through the process and figure out where everything bumps up against each other. I get the impression from them that there's not a lot of wiggle room in the way that it is currently worded, but certainly as we think about implementing it here and we talk about sort of the forms that live behind the scene, we can certainly work with we're training all of our administrators, but we can certainly work with them around the role of the advisor and what might make the most sense for that person in terms of how we ensure that they're supporting students in the way that they really need to be supported in a very educated way, I think is what you're getting at, right?
So yes, I'm just worried about those moments where where there can be, frankly, a class issue where somebody knows to walk into that room with an attorney, and somebody else might walk into that room with, with a friend, and what that means and what that does to the process. I just want to make sure that there's some sort of language somewhere that, there is some sort of advocacy that says, this is what will be best for you, so that the power circumstances will be as equal as they can be, which is, I suppose, the point. I just think that should be expressed somewhere.
It's interesting too, in the world of special education, surrogate parents, when they're appointed, there's a very strict process around what they have to go through in order to be able to represent at the IEP table students who don't have parents or guardians. And so that is, I agree, I actually found that to be lacking in this. So I'm happy to go back and ask some more questions about that.
I would offer there's a flip side, though, I think, to the intent behind this, is that I think it was written primarily with colleges in mind, but there are some situations where administrations might actually say to someone, I'm sorry, they're not an attorney, you can't just bring someone that you want into this dialogue. And it's meant, I think, actually, to make sure that people aren't excluded from the process because they're not an attorney, if that makes sense. Because some people simply, they don't want an attorney, they just want someone that they trust to be kind of that extra set of ears, and it's meant to protect that right, so we would just want to navigate that.
I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to comment real quickly, but I think I sort of agree with what everyone has said in that it's hard to parse out what the point, like what the main idea of the policy is, because I thought that it was, the first couple paragraphs, which would make sense, but then it goes into a definition of harassment, but then there's a whole other thing about sexual harassment, and I understand the complications around, but that's what I think makes it really, really hard to read and understand is like, what is the point of this policy? Because there's so many things in it. There's the, I can understand the point of how do you handle student complaints versus how do you handle staff complaints? And I don't know, it just seems that seems like more than one policy.
So a few years ago, and I don't remember why we did this, maybe you remember, Marie. Yeah.
So it's so interesting, and maybe we can take it back and see if we can sort of put 2 or 3 pieces on separate pages. We used to have a harassment policy for students, a harassment policy for employees, a sexual harassment for students and for employees. And the problem is when something happens to someone, they're not legal experts, they're not policy experts, they look for the word harassment. And we were finding that people didn't necessarily find the right policy and they weren't all in the same place. So a number of years ago, we combined them all into a single policy. Now this Title IX language added a lot of language to it. So maybe we can look at a way to sort of have Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, have it, I don't know, we can look at trying to make it more readable.
I think it just looks like it goes back and forth between the different
Yeah.
things. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and I hear what you're saying 100%, and then I can't believe I'm going to say this, John, but it does seem like some of the things are procedures underneath the policy, like how do you, how do you go about the complaint? And, so I think that complicates it as well.
I do think legally the policy has to have the contact people in there and that kind of thing. So let us look at it one more time. And part of it is we did add the Title IX stuff on top of what was already there. So maybe it doesn't make chronological sense. And I want to add to Kira, you make a good point. What Peter said is true. And the thing is, this policy encompasses all different kinds of complaints. So some of them might be very minor. You don't want the person to feel like they have to go hire an attorney in order to lodge a complaint. And you do find a lot of the time, people just want someone there to support them, or they have someone in their lives that has more experience than they do. So I certainly wouldn't want to limit it to attorneys or say that. I will say when it is a high risk, a high stakes kind of situation, we do often say you may want to get an attorney for this.
Kira, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry. You know what? Actually, I'll leave this thought, and maybe I'll write something for sub policy just to keep this conversation going. Thank you, though.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment or a question? All right, then I will let Diane continue with the next policy.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that feedback. I encourage you to put your thoughts in writing, and please email them to me by the end of the day on Monday. We will be likely meeting next week. We have a placeholder meeting to see if we can work through this. In particular, I hear a lot about the discipline policy too in the handbook, that it's just too much language and too much jargon, and make it readable and make it accessible for the people who are reading it. So there's a couple of different ways we can go with this policy. If you want just a broad statement like "we do not tolerate harassment," let me know if that's what you want. I know that the sexual harassment policy was kind of added, the federal guidance was kind of infused and added into the general harassment regulations, but it definitely has to have certain components. What is it? They are offering this as a protection for people. So what is it? And it's very specifically defined to make sure that people in the workplace know that it's illegal, and who is in charge of handling that, and what you do if you're harassed in terms of support, whether it's legal support or just a trusted person who can kind of go in with you and say, this is happening. So please do put it in writing and send it to me, and I'll pass this all on to the subcommittee. And I appreciate all the feedback on this a lot. I really do. It's an important policy. Okay, next policy is a new policy in your packet, policy EBCFA on mask or face coverings, on masking. And so I just want to say that even though our reopening plan is to be considered policy, MASC is recommending that school committees further develop and define and emphasize our beliefs and directives around mask wearing during COVID-19. Both of these policies were vetted by legal counsel. I'll take any comments that you have on mask wearing as well at this point, if that's okay with you, Tessa.
Yeah, absolutely. A comment actually that I received was around accommodations with regards to like the following types of masks, face coverings are not acceptable to wear at school: masks with vents, and particularly neck gaiters, or the plastic face shields without a fabric or surgical mask. I realize that it looks like this is sort of like the extra part of the policy. It's separate from the policy, right? -R. It's the procedure. So I just was curious about, there is language about medical exemptions for not wearing masks, but I wonder about accommodations for wearing a different kind of mask or something like that.
So the intent behind the procedure in the exemption process that parents would submit a request for by September 4th is that that would be a process we would work through. So after, speaking with the family around the concerns, then thinking about would a neck gaiter and a face shield be an acceptable alternative for a student who couldn't tolerate a mask, for example. So those are all things that we would work through as part of that process.
Great, that's helpful. All right, does anyone else have comments or questions? Kira? Didn't hear me. Kira?
I noticed that there was punitive language in this policy regarding the use of masks and not the use of masks. And I was curious as to, and it was very brief and rather broad. And I want to know whether or not we really feel as though that's necessary given the circumstances. Should we be more specific about what that means? It feels counterproductive to me to have punitive language in this policy, but I'm curious to know more details about that.
Which language is punitive? In the policy or the procedure?
Yeah.
If students are in violation of this policy, towards the bottom of it, or it says, I assume that's what she's talking about, and it says if staff are in violation of the policy, that.
Well, that and students. I saw student language in there too.
I said students first.
So that is language right out of MASC. So I don't know if somebody else has a comment. I don't have a problem taking it out, but I think there's a reason for it.
I think one of the overwhelming concerns that I think we've heard from families and staff coming back to school is a requirement to wear masks going to be enforceable? And, so I think the intent of the MASC policy was to make sure that there was an enforcement mechanism to it, because that was such a high level of concern, particularly where there was a lot of political debate going on about whether or not there was scientific evidence to back up masks, particularly at the time. And I think, in all honesty, a lot of our schools very much use restorative practices with students when they are working on things, and it's really a conversation that takes place. But, there could be a scenario where there's no medical reason why a student can't wear a mask, and the school's in a position to have to do that. And so I think this is just the language, unfortunately, that's meant to just give that clause to be able to enforce it.
Nora?
Can I speak to that briefly?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a new policy. And so what's happening is a lot of first reads are happening this week and last week and next week. And so we're starting to kind of see how school committees are tweaking this policy. And there are some that are articulating the expectations they have, that the teachers will offer direct instruction in the classroom and educate students on mask wearing. And some school systems have even in their policy defined a 5-step protocol or a multi-step protocol for educators on what to do that begins with more of a restorative justice type of approach, where the student who is uncomfortable wearing a mask or is taking the mask off is first, just spoken to and explained it in more detail why it's important. And then, kind of like maybe step 4 or 5 is that the principal gets involved. So if you feel more comfortable with that language, it certainly does articulate more of the process of what might happen. Kira,
also, Diane, I added.
Am I allowed to speak? I just want to say I think that's great. I would just love to see an expansion of ideas around this so that it's not subjective or there's any room for arbitrary enforcement in this language. That would be helpful for me. Thank you.
So Diane, you had sent along some helpful language earlier, and I did incorporate it in the procedure, which I don't think is the same that landed in the packet because it was just updated. And it does include supportive language around the instructional piece, which we had always intended, but that wasn't transparent in our existing procedure. It talks also about students who experience difficulty with mask wearing and starts with that restorative justice piece and the educational piece, which a lot of our folks for sure do. So there are some progressive steps in there for individuals to follow, which I think actually will make the educators also feel more supported in this, because that's a big question they have about, how do I keep the students safe and me safe?
Nora?
I was just going to add that that's one of the things that we did talk about in policy sub is that balance, Kira, that you're bringing up between wanting students to understand the importance of wearing a mask and be educated about how to wear it, and the comfort level of a student who might need a mask break for a different reason, with also the safety of the students and of the entire school community. And so I think that language, could definitely be added to show that it's meant to be a learning process and not punitive in nature, but that there has to be some kind of bottom line, I guess, about the requirement of wearing a mask.
John?
The policy JICH, alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use by students prohibited, reads, a student shall not, regardless of the quantity used or consumed, possess, buy, or sell, or give away any beverage containing alcohol, any tobacco product, including vapor e-cigarettes, marijuana, steroids, or any controlled substance. The school committee prohibits the use or consumption by students of alcohol, tobacco products, or other drugs on school property or at any school function. Additionally, any student who is under the influence of drugs or alcoholic beverages prior to or during attendance or participation in a school-sponsored activity will be barred from that activity and may be subject to disciplinary action. And then there's a posting line. That is the total sum of the drug prohibition policy. The policy with respect to masks should be no longer than that. If we think it is good policy for people to use face coverings, our policy should say, we should use face coverings. The details of how that should be implemented, what those face coverings should be, when those face coverings should be removed, are the subject of procedure. It's a bad idea to Frankenstein a whole bunch of procedure into policy. And we could have a much longer discussion about this, but I think that to me this felt like, well, let's make a policy about Hurricane Laura. It's like, this is a nuts idea. You don't make policy about this one-off event that's coming. You make policy in the context of a general construct. And to the point that was raised earlier with respect to and the importance of mask wearing exists as part of a spectrum of activity that we would like to see in our community. That starts with minimizing unique contacts, that continues with being sensitive to physical distance and looking at the ability to conduct certain activities outdoors. Some of those things, we can enforce and we can encourage. Some of them we cannot. But whether we are successful or not will actually depend on the sum of those things, not a singular thing. So, I object to the policy, because it's convoluted with procedure, and, I further object to the policy because it really doesn't address what is the subject of policy, which is how can we minimize the spread of infectious disease, which is the level at which our policy should read.
Adam?
I'm going to respectfully disagree with John, mostly because I believe that we're in times that are different than when that alcohol and substance abuse policy was written. And I think different times call for a different tenor in policy. And so I do like this policy as it stands. I do appreciate Kara's comments, particularly around I don't want to say vague, but the seemingly punitive clauses at the end. And I'm glad to hear that some changes have already been made with regards to the procedure for that. And so I would encourage that the policy subcommittee revisit those two sentences and change the language in a way that points to a detailed procedure, to John's point, on how, not even enforcement, how encouragement will be provided to both staff and students to participate in the policy requirement.
Thanks, Adam. You said what I would have said, which is I respectfully disagree. And John and I have respectfully disagreed about this and with regards to many, many policies. But what I have shared with him in general is that I think, yes, we are in different times. And I do think that there are things like masks where parents are looking for guidance. And it is very helpful to see that, well, visitors are going to be expected to do this. And what's going to happen if staff aren't in agreement with this? And what will happen if, you know, a staff member has a student in their room who refuses? I mean, these are anxieties that I have heard expressed by teachers and anxieties expressed by parents. And I just think that in our highly anxious environment, that in these times, and hopefully we're not going to have a mask face covering policy forever. I mean, that's really my hope. So since my hope is that this is not going to be a permanent policy, that we'll be looking at this with regards to this year and what it covers right now, and we'll revisit if and when we have to. But I think the more information that our families and our staff members are provided with regards to this very important issue that is implicit in bringing us back to school, that more information is important. So I thank the policy subcommittee members that put this together. I echo what Adam said about the language. Thank you, Kira, for bringing that up. I think that it's a great note to work on. Is there anyone else that has an additional question or concern? John?
If we do want to go down this road, the one other change that I would like to see in the policy is that we explicitly sunset it so that it will expire on June 30th, 2021 if we do not rescind it earlier.
We have no idea when it will end. My hope is just that it will. So, all right. Anybody else? Good. Okay. Thanks, Diane. Was there anything else from policy, or that was it?
That was it. Thank you, everyone.
Are there other members? It's not in the agenda, but I know that Nora was able to attend a FinCom meeting. Are there other member reports that people would like to share besides Nora? Nora? Okay, hold on. Nora, would you like to share?
So I attended Boxborough's FinCom meeting on Tuesday, and there were, I think, two different things that came up that are relevant for the school committee. One of them was that FinCom was discussing the VocaTech applications and kind of looking at numbers around students attending Minuteman. And one point that was brought up was that when there is a AB student from Boxborough who's on the Minuteman waiting list, FinCom doesn't know who that is, but they were hoping the information could be shared that they can still apply also for the other two tech schools, Assabet and Neshoba, and they weren't sure if students on the waiting list were aware of that, and if they were sort of being encouraged to look beyond Minuteman to other schools that have maybe shorter commutes, but are also other options. So that came up. The other thing that came up was around the CARES Act and the school committee's sort of request for some funding from Boxborough's CARES Act to possibly cover the Chromebooks that we've discussed. And the current standing as of Tuesday was that Boxborough FinCom said they were not certain if Chromebooks were eligible for reimbursement through CARES, and they had sent a request for further information, but they weren't sure who would be answering that question from CARES, and they weren't sure a timeline on getting that response. And so that was another topic of conversation, that they did feel like they had adequate funding and that funding probably was set aside for the Chromebooks kind of unofficially, but that they're waiting for an answer from CARES about whether or not they can use the funds in that way.
Thanks, Nora.
Sure.
Adam?
Yeah, the Budget Subcommittee met this past Tuesday. We reviewed the presentation that Dave gave earlier this evening. We reorganized in that we confirmed who the voting members of the committee were, and we will be changing our meeting time for the foreseeable future to Mondays at 11 a.m., and those are posted.
And we're meeting again next week, right, as the beginning?
Yes, the beat goes on.
Is there anyone else that had something that they wanted to contribute? Diane?
So Kira and I are both the liaisons to the Acton Board of Selectmen. And I think there are two things that, that the committee should know about, if not, they don't know already. One is the racial equity work that the Acton Board of Selectmen is doing, and the other one is special town meeting. So I'll let Kira jump in and just pick one.
So I would say that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission being created by the town has moved up their deadline for applications and letters of interest. So that deadline is now Friday, September 4th, not February. I don't know where I went with that. And those members will be announced at the next selectmen's meeting after that, which would be September the 14th.
Okay. The other piece is, hopefully everyone knows this, but Acton's having a special town meeting on Tuesday, the 8th of September at 6 p.m. It's going to be an outside event and inside event for, whatever your preference is, just like annual town meeting was. So it will be outside, like where the gym area is on that side where the senior parking lot is. There's just 9 articles there's 9 warrant articles. One is a big one is on a major land acquisition in South Acton for conservation purposes. And they're also amending the town charter to change the name of Board of Selectmen to Select Board. A couple other ones you might be interested in is they're seeking authority for authorization for a small business grant program for the town to take free cash to fund that. There are about 43 eligible small businesses in Acton that were impacted by COVID, and they are eligible for cash for grants of up to $4,000 each. And they'd like to be able to move that forward. There's a couple non-binding resolutions about declaring a climate emergency, and some zoning changes about speed limits and things. So I hope to see everybody there.
And I'll just note that Kira and I are going to be running the joint PTSO, and I know that there have already been some emails and questions from some of our PTO leaders, and I am aware of them. And we are working on putting together a virtual meeting to start the year off. So if any of those members are watching, then they can know that they'll get an email from us soon. Is there anyone else that had anything to share? Nope. Kira has another?
I just want to note that the DEI advisory for the school district will meet for the first time in a long while on Monday, the 31st.
Excellent. And is there a school building committee update?
Yeah, I think, there's pages and pages of minutes in your packet that will go through a lot of the meetings. But, at the most recent meeting, which was last night, we shared some really good news in terms of the gates readiness to be able to open. I don't know if any of you had driven by gates over the last few weeks. It was definitely giving me heart palpitations, thinking about how we would bring students and faculty back on that campus. But Consigli has now finished paving all of the temporary bus loop, as well as the faculty parking lot, parent drop-off area, creating the new parking lot at the back. The modulars have been delivered and are installed on site, and they're just finishing off the interiors now. And I have to tell you, the parking lot looks absolutely beautiful. It's the best that side of Gates has ever looked. Unfortunately, it's actually just temporary, and it will have to come down. But they really did a nice job. I have to say, Consigli and the decision to hire Consigli was absolutely fantastic. They have been so responsive to everything that we've asked them to do to make sure that school was ready. They even went so far that when the Gates teachers who were coming in to kind of clean out their stuff from classrooms to make sure that they were safe and appropriately distanced, Consigli actually sent some of their workers over to carry the boxes out for the Gates teachers so that they didn't have to traipse across the construction area back and forth from school. I mean, that's how responsive they've been. It's been wonderful working with them, and I'm just so pleased that the school has really come together to be ready to open. So it's a strikingly different look if you go over there now, and they're making good progress.
Great. All right. Per policy DDA, we have some gifts and donations that require acceptance by the school committee. I don't know if you want to speak to those at all, Peter.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, yes, the first one is, it is a United Way grant for community education for $2,500. And you know, which is hugely generous. We're so grateful for that. And then there's another gift for $4,000 to the Acton Boxborough Regional High School STEM program. And that is from the Society for Science and the Public and Regeneron. So very grateful for those two gifts. And the suggested motions in the packet.
Yes, Adam?
Move to approve with gratitude.
Second.
All right. Adam?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes, with gratitude.
Diane?
Yes.
Yeben?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes, with gratitude.
And me, with gratitude in honor of Paul. So I like to think about him every time we're accepting gifts. Thank you, Paul. The statement of warrants is in your packet. I will read them. I'll give Adam a break. You're welcome. You were just going to throw it to John? That's all right. I move that the school committee vote to approve payroll warrants as follows. Number P2103 dated 7/30/20 in the amount of $652,528.24. Number P2104 dated 8/13/20 in the amount of $577,659.11. Payroll deduction warrants as follows. Number 21-003 PR dated 7/30/20 in the amount of $320,131.22. Number 21-004 PR dated 8/13/20 in the amount of $142,795.89. Vendor warrants as follows. Number 21-002 dated 7/23/20 in the amount of $1,129,927.93. Number 21-003 dated 8/6/20 in the amount of $1,896,416.20. Number 21-004 dated 8/20/20 in the amount of $1,743,506.93. And student activity reimbursement warrant as follows. Number 21-003 BL dated 8/6/20 in the amount of $1,235.97.
Second.
Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Yeben?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
Myself, yes. That passes unanimously. Peter, is there anything in the FYI?
I would just point everyone to the school calendar. That is the most recent voted school calendar that we've included. And, you know, just, you know, one thought, and, you know, we could certainly talk about this more at the next meeting, but as we've started to think about snow days already, we already know that we're going to be using a heat index where if it's too hot within some of our schools to safely wear masks, or the heat would discourage the use of masks because it's so hot, we would be calling a remote day for those schools. I'm inclined to think similarly about snow days, where we now have all of the technology and mechanism to be able to go remote. And given that the school year is now kind of late because of the changes to the school calendar, I'm much more inclined to treat snow days as remote learning days, because our educators are going to be prepared to pivot in that direction. So that's, you know, food for thought. If you would like to discuss that more, if you let Tessa know, we can certainly talk more about that at the next meeting. But I wanted to just put that on your radar, that that's something I was considering. And then, you know, I would just end my own FYI just by continuing to express a lot of gratitude for all of our educators as they've come back to school. I know that everyone feels differently, and it's not easy for a whole group of our educators, but we're just so grateful that they've really continued to balance their ideas around, you know, fears that they may have about coming back, and also yet simultaneously recognizing that our kids also have needs, and some of those students need in-person instruction. So we know our educators are giving a lot. I just want to make sure we continue to express our gratitude.
Thank you, Peter. Our next meeting is September 3rd, which is next week. And I just wanted to note, because John was concerned that people weren't aware that we are meeting in person, that our meetings from here on out, unless health conditions warrant a change, we will continue to meet in person and via Zoom, because we have some members who are more comfortable participating that way. But unless something changes, this is how we're going to continue to meet. So the public should know that. Teachers and should know that's how we're continuing to meet. So is there a motion? So by that clock, I'm only 30 seconds late. By my phone, I'm 3 minutes late.
Move to adjourn?
Second. Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora? Ginny?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Yevon?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.